I remember the moment I saw the candles flickering on the cake. My son was turning 7. He'd been waiting for this day for months. The whole living room was filled with balloons, paper streamers, his favorite dinosaur decorations. He was glowing. You ever seen pure joy on a kid's face? That was him, until my husband walked in. He looked right at me, then at our son, and in a flat, cold voice said, "There's no birthday this year. Mom spent all our money." Everything stopped. The music, the chatter, even the kids froze. My son blinked like he didn't understand. Neither did I. I had no idea what was happening. The room spun. I laughed, nervously, thinking he was joking. But he wasn't. He started pulling down the decorations, ripping streamers from the walls, dumped the cake, his own son's birthday cake, into the trash. My son started crying, asking what he did wrong. I tried to hold him, tried to explain, but my husband raised his voice louder, blaming me, shouting about reckless spending that never even happened. Everyone left, in silence. No one looked me in the eye. And when the door closed behind the last guest, I saw it, that tiny smirk on his face. He planned it, every bit of it. That was the moment something broke in me. Not just my heart, but the illusion I'd been living in. The man I married, the man I tried to protect my son from, had just used his own child's happiness to punish me, and he thought I'd just stand there and take it. He had no idea what I was capable of, but he was about to find out. After everyone left, I sat on the couch with my son curled into my side, still sniffling, asking why Daddy was so mad. I didn't have an answer. What could I say? That the man I married had turned into someone unrecognizable? That the same person who used to make us pancakes on Sundays now seemed to enjoy hurting us? I waited until my son finally fell asleep on my lap, wiped his cheeks, carried him to bed. Then I just sat there, alone in that quiet living room, decorations half ripped, the smell of frosting still in the air. I stared at the empty spot on the table where the cake had been. The way he dumped it without a second thought, it burned into my memory. But here's the thing, that birthday? It wasn't a one-time outburst. It was the final act in a slow, steady unraveling. Our marriage hadn't always been bad. When we first met, he was charming, attentive, said all the right things. He made me feel safe, wanted. That's how they get you. The change came like rust, silent, slow, spreading until everything was brittle. It started with little digs at my appearance, backhanded compliments, jokes that didn't feel like jokes. Then he started managing our money alone, cutting me out of conversations, telling me I wasn't good with numbers. If I questioned him, he'd twist my words, make me feel crazy. But I stayed. I told myself he was stressed, that things would get better. We had a child. I didn't want to break up our home. So I swallowed it, smiled through it, walked on eggshells every day. You don't realize how deep you're in until you stop breathing normally. And then came the punishments. They weren't physical, not usually. It was more psychological. Silent treatment for days, guilt trips, gaslighting, turning our son against me in little ways, like calling me mean if I asked him to do homework, or telling him I was the reason we couldn't go to the amusement park. He painted me as the problem while pretending to be the fun parent. I started noticing how our son flinched when his father raised his voice, how he'd glance at me nervously when asking simple things, like if he could have a snack. That crushed me. I knew I had to get out, but every time I thought about leaving, I froze. What if I couldn't make it on my own? What if he took our son? What if no one believed me? That's the thing about emotional abuse. It makes you doubt your own reality. You start believing you're the crazy one. Then came the birthday. The day I'd been planning for weeks, saving every spare dollar, even selling some of my jewelry online to afford the cake, the balloons, the stupid inflatable dinosaur that my son had begged for. I'd kept it all a surprise. He was going to have the birthday he deserved, even if his dad couldn't be bothered to lift a finger. Apparently, that was my mistake. Doing something without his approval. Making our son happy without his control. Because it wasn't about the money. I checked the accounts afterward. He had plenty stashed away. No, this was punishment. A calculated move to destroy something I cared about, just to remind me who was in charge. After that night, he didn't apologize. Didn't even bring it up. He acted like nothing happened. Made himself a sandwich. Watched a game. I sat across from him, stunned by the normalcy. Like he hadn't just publicly humiliated me and shattered our son's heart. I thought maybe he'd feel ashamed. Maybe he'd try to make it up to us. But all I got was silence. Smug, satisfied silence. That night, I lay in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to him snore. My mind kept replaying the look on my son's face, the confusion, the heartbreak, the tears. I couldn't stop hearing his little voice, asking, "Did I do something wrong, Mommy?" I turned and looked at the man sleeping beside me and realized something bone deep. He didn't love me. He didn't love our son. Not in the way that mattered. He loved control, power, and he was using both to crush us. I'd spent years hoping he'd change. That maybe if I were better, quieter, more agreeable, he'd go back to the man I married. But that man was never real. And suddenly, I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. Furious at myself for staying so long. Furious at him for stealing my son's joy. Furious that I had let this become normal. He thought he broke me that day. But what he really did was wake me up. I woke up the next morning before the sun. He was still asleep, mouth slightly open, completely unaware that something inside me had shifted overnight. I walked into the kitchen barefoot, the floor cold under my feet, and stood there staring at the counter. The leftover party supplies were still there. Napkins with little T-Rexes, a balloon half deflated, curling ribbon on the floor like forgotten confetti. I didn't cry. Not anymore. Instead, I opened a notebook from the junk drawer and wrote 3 things at the top of the page. 1. Get my son out. 2. Get proof. 3. Don't let him see it coming. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't just leaving. I was taking my life back, quietly, smartly. No more begging, no more arguing. I was done playing his game. I started with research. At night, after he went to bed, I'd sit on the couch with my laptop and pretend to be shopping. In reality, I was reading articles about emotional abuse, legal custody, financial escape plans. I joined an online forum for women like me, and for the first time in years, I felt understood. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't alone. The next step was money. I opened a secret account under my maiden name. Every time I bought groceries, I'd take a little cash back. $10 here, $20 there. I sold old clothes, electronics, anything I could get away with. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Then I started documenting. Every cruel comment. Every time he belittled me in front of our son. Every weird outburst. Every passive-aggressive insult. I recorded some of his rants. Quietly, carefully. I even saved screenshots of his texts, the ones where he blamed me for everything or joked about how stupid I was. And through it all, I acted the same. Sweet, agreeable, predictable, because I needed him to keep thinking I was weak. But while he played king of his little castle, I was building my escape route, brick by brick. And the best part? He had no idea. I also started rebuilding myself. I went to therapy, found a woman who specialized in recovery from narcissistic abuse. She helped me name what I'd been living through: gaslighting, financial control, psychological manipulation. For the first time, someone looked at me and said, You're not imagining this. It's real, and it's not your fault. That broke something open inside me. Years of shame started falling away. I realized I had spent so long trying to be a good wife, a good mother, that I'd completely forgotten to be good to myself. I started reclaiming tiny parts of me, wearing clothes he didn't like, playing music in the car that made me feel alive again, saying no without apology. I even went back to drawing, something I hadn't done in years. Late at night, after our son was asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table sketching while the house was quiet. It was like remembering who I used to be, piece by piece. And I started watching my son differently, more closely. I noticed how he watched us, how he noticed tension, how he shrunk when voices were raised. I started talking to him more, helping him name his feelings. I told him it was okay to feel sad, that it was never his fault when adults acted badly. He began to open up, too. One night, he whispered to me, "I don't like it when Daddy yells. It makes my tummy hurt." That sentence alone was enough to solidify everything. This wasn't just about me. This was about saving him, too. There was one night, about a month after the ruined birthday, when we were watching a movie together, just the two of us. I made popcorn, dimmed the lights, let him pick the film. He was curled up in a blanket, giggling. For that brief hour, he looked peaceful. And I realized this is what life could be. No tension, no walking on eggshells, just peace. That night, I whispered a promise to him while he slept. "I'm getting us out. I swear. Just hold on." I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was getting ready to fight. The first real step came on a Tuesday morning. He was at work, our son at school, and I had the house to myself. I stood in our bedroom staring at the drawer where he kept all the important documents: tax returns, insurance, bank statements. My hands shook as I opened it. Every instinct screamed that I was doing something dangerous, but I kept going. I scanned and copied everything I could find. Then I carefully placed it all back, exactly as it was. That was the beginning of my evidence folder. It wasn't just for court. It was my safety net, proof of his control, his lies, his manipulations. The more I gathered, the stronger I felt. I even kept a journal, writing everything down in detail. What he said, how he said it, what my son witnessed. It was my own little war record. At night, while he watched TV, I'd be next to him, scrolling on my phone like I was bored. But I was filling out legal forms, saving phone numbers for shelters and lawyers, reading stories of other women who had made it out. Their words became fuel. Every story of escape, of taking back control, it gave me hope. I found a lawyer who offered free consultations. I told her everything. She didn't flinch, didn't doubt me. She laid out a plan, simple and clean. File for divorce, seek emergency custody, present the evidence. Do it quickly, without warning. She told me I was smart for staying quiet. "That's how you stay safe," she said. "You're not just a survivor, you're a strategist." I left her office lighter than I'd felt in years. Back at home, I kept things normal. That was the hardest part. Smiling when he was around, laughing at his terrible jokes, pretending to be interested in his stories. The performance drained me, but I did it for my son, for the exit I was building. And then something changed. I started feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Confidence. It came in little moments. The way I spoke to my son with calm authority. How I stopped apologizing for things I didn't do. The mornings I woke up before anyone else just to sip coffee in silence, feeling the power of having a plan. I was no longer waiting for rescue. I was becoming my own. One day at school pickup, another mom complimented me. "You look so much more relaxed lately," she said. "Lighter." I smiled because I knew what she was seeing. I was rising. Even my son sensed it. He started smiling more, laughing freely. One afternoon, I watched him build a Lego castle and say, "Mom, one day, we're gonna have a big happy house with no yelling." My throat tightened, but I just nodded. "Yes, baby, we will." I started setting boundaries, subtle ones. If he yelled, I walked out of the room. If he made snide comments, I responded with silence. It drove him crazy. He didn't know what was happening, only that something was shifting, and he wasn't in control anymore. One night he tried to pick a fight over dinner, accused me of poisoning our son's mind because the boy had asked why Daddy didn't come to his last soccer game. I stayed calm. "Maybe you should ask him how he feels," I said, looking him in the eye. He froze. That moment, him realizing I wasn't scared anymore, was electric. And I was just getting started. Do you want to see how this revenge unfolds? Subscribe now, because what happens next is unbelievable. This was only the beginning. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been held back, then you know how this feels. Subscribe now, because this story is far from over. Because then, the moment I had been waiting for finally arrived. I got the call from my lawyer. Everything was in place. Papers filed, court date set, emergency custody motion accepted. He wouldn't see it coming. I waited for one specific day, the anniversary of the birthday he ruined. That morning, I packed my son's bag while he was eating cereal. I told him we were going on an adventure. He giggled, thinking it was a game. I smiled and said, "It is." I dropped him at school, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "I'll see you soon. Everything's going to be okay." Then, I went home and waited. The sheriff arrived just after noon. I handed him the packet, everything documented, signed, ready. My heart was racing, but I was steady, focused. By the time my husband came home, the sheriff was standing in the driveway with divorce papers and a court order. The look on his face was priceless. He tried to yell to argue, but the officer shut him down immediately. I didn't say a word. I stood behind the screen door, arms crossed, just watching. He screamed something about betrayal, about how I was ruining our family. I didn't flinch. The officer finally said, "Sir, you need to leave the premises now." And just like that, he was gone. I locked the door behind him. Then I sat on the couch, looked around, and exhaled. The silence felt like music. The first night after he left, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, but because I wasn't. For the first time in years, the house felt still. No stomping footsteps, no passive-aggressive muttering from the next room, no pretending to be asleep while he sulked beside me. Just quiet. It was almost eerie. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring at the clock, waiting for the panic to hit. But it never did. Instead, I felt something strange. Relief. Like I'd been holding my breath for a decade and was finally allowed to exhale. The real battle, though, started the next day. He called non-stop, left voicemail after voicemail, shouting, crying, bargaining. The rage in his voice was familiar, the desperation wasn't. He hadn't expected me to fight back. Definitely not like this. When I didn't answer, he switched tactics. Emails filled with guilt-tripping, threats, promises. He even tried sending flowers. I dumped them straight into the trash. And then came the court date. He showed up smug, clean-shaven, wearing his best suit, trying to charm the judge. But it didn't work, not this time. Because I had receipts. I had recordings, screenshots, notes from our son's school counselor, witnesses who saw his temper, friends who had pulled away because they'd sensed something was wrong long ago and were now willing to testify. When my lawyer played the audio of him mocking our son, calling me worthless, the entire courtroom went silent. He tried to interrupt, but the judge shut him down. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than I ever could. He left the courtroom red-faced and furious. I left with temporary full custody and a protection order. That should have been enough, but he wasn't done. A week later, he showed up at the school unannounced, trying to pick up our son. The office called me immediately. I raced there, heart pounding, expecting chaos. But I didn't find my son scared. I found him standing beside the school counselor, arms crossed just like I used to do. He looked his father in the eye and said, "I want to go home with Mom." I didn't cry then. I waited until we got in the car, and he grabbed my hand and said, "You kept your promise." From that day forward, I kept everything locked down. Our schedule, our location, every detail guarded. I got a new phone, changed the locks, even installed security cameras. He kept trying to find ways in, through guilt, through family, through mutual friends. But every time I blocked the path. The power shift wasn't just legal, it was emotional. People started seeing him for who he really was. Family members who had once defended him started reaching out to me, apologizing. One even said, "I had no idea. He always made you look so unstable." That's when I realized the scope of it, how far he'd gone to shape the narrative, and how much strength it took to tear it down. But the real victory wasn't the court orders or the custody. It was what I saw every morning, my son waking up without fear, laughing again, dancing around the kitchen in socks, asking questions, drawing dinosaurs, telling me he loved me just because. One night, while we were brushing our teeth side by side, he looked at me and said, "You're braver than a superhero." I smiled, spit into the sink, and said, "You made me brave." And then, like it was nothing, he said, "I don't miss Daddy yelling." It hit me harder than any legal win. Because this wasn't just revenge. It was rescue. It was healing. It was justice. He may have tried to break me by ruining that birthday. But in the end, all he did was light the fire that burned the whole illusion down. 1 year later, we celebrated my son's 8th birthday. Same living room, new energy. The walls were painted a soft green he picked himself. The air was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of chocolate cake. This time from a local bakery we both loved. No shouting, no tension, just kids running around with balloons, adults sipping coffee, and my son beaming like the sun itself was inside him. He wore a little paper crown and hugged me tight as the guests started to arrive. "Mom," he whispered, "this is the best birthday ever." I just nodded. He had no idea what it took to get us here, and I wouldn't burden him with that. That was my battle. His only job now was to be a kid, happy, free. People asked where his father was. I simply said, "Not in the picture," and moved on. I didn't owe anyone the details. They didn't see the nights I stayed up watching court deadlines, or the way my hands trembled signing those papers. They didn't see the bruises that weren't on my skin, but in my spirit. But I saw them. I carried every moment, every decision, every ounce of fear and fire that brought us here. And you know what? I wouldn't change a thing. About 6 months after the final court ruling, he tried to reach out again, this time through his new girlfriend. She messaged me saying he wanted another chance, that he'd done a lot of reflecting. I didn't respond. The next day, he called from a blocked number. I picked up, just once. He started talking, fast, emotional. Said he missed us. Said our son needed a father. Said he was sorry. I listened. And then, in the calmest voice I've ever used, I said, "You made your choice. And so did I." Then I hung up, blocked the number, and never looked back. It wasn't about punishment anymore. It was about peace. My revenge wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic public takedown. It was quiet. measured, unshakable. I took the one thing he thought I'd never have the courage to do, and I did it without flinching. I left. I rebuilt. And I never let him drag us down again. Now when I look at my son, I see joy that no longer needs my protection to survive. I see a boy who laughs freely, who trusts his own voice, who no longer checks the room before he speaks. And when I look at myself, I see a woman who nearly lost herself trying to hold together something that was never whole. But I also see someone who walked through hell and still managed to light the way out. My success isn't measured in money or praise. It's in the mornings where I wake up without fear, in the quiet nights, in the birthday candles that stay lit. So when people ask, "Why didn't you leave sooner?" I just say, because I needed to be sure I could win. And now I have. What would you do in my situation? Drop a comment below, because someone out there might need to hear your answer more than you know.